Sometimes I think I can still hear the sound in my sleep, that steady buzz of the tattoo machine, just shaky enough to feel alive. It's been with me for 15 years. And still, every time the needle touches skin, I hold my breath. Like it's the first time. Like it's not just a tattoo, but a confession. My name's Ryan Keller. I'm 34. I'm a tattoo artist. I own a shop in Austin, Texas, Anchor and Ink. It's a small space tucked into a brick building on the corner of Lawndale Street. The sign out front's half faded, but inside it's got soul. Vinyl records playing. Eucalyptus in the air. Posters of old concerts plastered across the ceiling. And a coffee pot nobody ever cleans right. My clients? All kinds. One day it's a biker getting flames up his neck. The next it's a nurse wanting a tiny heart behind her ear. I've tattooed software engineers, divorcees, students, once even a local pastor. In this job, you're not just an artist, you're part therapist, part priest, part bartender. People bring their pain, or their joy, or a piece of something they can't quite explain, and they want to wear it. I love what I do. I love the sound of the machine, the smell of fresh ink, that moment right before the first line, when everything feels like possibility. Tattooing is a kind of living art. It doesn't hang on a wall. It breathes with the person. But I had no idea how deep it could really go until the day Julia knocked on my door. Julie is an old friend. We used to run in the same circles. Then she got into nonprofit work, hospice volunteering, community outreach. We hadn't talked in a while. Just the occasional like on Instagram. I posted designs. She posted sunsets, prayer flags, old people holding hands. Then one Friday, out of nowhere, she messaged me. Hey Ryan, I've got a weird favor to ask. There's a patient in our hospice. He really wants a tattoo. Could you come do it? Hospice? A tattoo? I honestly thought she was joking. But she wasn't. He said it's his last request, she wrote. He wants a wolf on his chest. Says he's always felt like one, and now he wants to set it free. What could I say to that? I grabbed my travel kit, my portable machine, gloves, ink, sanitizer, everything I usually bring to pop-ups and conventions. But this wasn't a bar or a music festival. I was headed somewhere quiet. Heavy. Still. The place was called Willow Haven. Not what I expected. No sterile white walls. No smell of bleach. It looked more like your grandma's living room. Warm lamps, soft music, family pictures taped to the walls. A nurse waved. A man in a bathrobe gave me a sleepy nod as I walked by. Julia met me near the front desk. Same ponytail, same tough kindness in her eyes. Room 204, she said. His name's Walter. He's a veteran. A little grumpy, but I think you'll like him. We walked down a narrow hallway, our steps echoing. I couldn't stop thinking, what was I about to walk into? Julia knocked softly and opened the door. Walter sat in a chair by the window. His skin was paper-thin, his arms like branches, but his gaze sharp as glass. You the artist? He asked. That's me. He gave a slow nod. Good. Draw me freedom. While I still got skin. He handed me a yellowed scrap of paper, a sketch of a wolf. Rough lines. Unfinished. The year 1973 written in the corner. I drew that in Korea. In the hospital. After the blast. I couldn't speak. But that wolf, that was everything I felt. I took a breath. Transferred the sketch to my stencil paper. Laid it across his chest. He looked down and nodded once. That's him. That's my shadow. I didn't talk much while I worked. Just let the hum of the machine fill the room. But Walter spoke. He talked about hikes in the Smoky Mountains. About his late wife and the dog that used to steal his shoes. About the letter he never sent his brother. I didn't say much. Just listened. Tattooed. Let his stories guide my hands. When it was done, I handed him the mirror. He didn't speak at first. Just looked. Then, with a hand shaking more from memory than age, he pressed his palm to the ink and whispered, Now I'm whole again. When I walked out, Julia hugged me. You have no idea what you just gave him, she said. And maybe I didn't. But that night, back at my studio, staring at my machine and the quiet space around me, I realized something. This wasn't just a tattoo. It was a final sentence in someone's story. And for the first time in years, I remembered why I ever picked up the needle in the first place. I remember how my hand trembled as I turned on the machine that day. It wasn't fear or nerves. It was the realization that this wasn't just another tattoo. This was the closing chapter of someone's story, and I had been asked to write it. Sit down, Ryan, Walter said, nodding toward the stool beside him. Julia says your hand doesn't shake. We'll see about that. He handed me a folded piece of paper aged, worn at the creases. It was the same sketch he'd shown me earlier. The wolf. Wild, rough, defiant. Underneath was written, 1973. Korea. I drew this in the hospital after the blast. We lost half our unit. I couldn't sleep. Couldn't speak. But I could draw. And that wolf, he said what I couldn't. I transferred the sketch onto stencil paper and pressed it gently to his chest. He looked down, nodded, and whispered, "That's him. That's me." The room was quiet. Just the hum of the machine, the smell of antiseptic, and the slow rhythm of Walter's breath. I worked carefully, slowly, like each line mattered more than the last. And all the while, he talked. He told me about a mountain hike where he almost proposed. About a fight with his brother that lasted 2 decades. About a dog named Ranger who used to bring him socks, but never the same pair. He spoke like someone who had held a lot in, and now, finally, the pressure had lifted. When I finished, I handed him the mirror. He didn't look right away. Just placed his hand over the ink and took a deep breath. "Now I'm real again," he said. And something in me shifted. Not like a decision. More like a door opening. Back at the shop, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I stared at the machines, the sterile lights, the posters on the ceiling, everything that used to feel like home. But now it all seemed quiet. My phone buzzed. Julia again. "Hey, we have someone else who'd love a tattoo. Her name's Martha. She wants something small. Something that glows." That word stuck with me. Glows. When should I come? Anytime. She's already asking about you. Martha was sitting by the window when I walked in. The room smelled like lavender and peppermint. Her bed was covered in floral pillows, and there was a notebook on the side table full of pressed flowers. She looked up at me with a grin. "You're Ryan, the one who did the wolf." "That's me." "Good. I want a daisy." "On my ankle." "Small, but bright." I nodded. "Any special reason?" She laughed. "My sister used to say I was the serious one. She was wild, danced in the kitchen, cried during cartoons, wore yellow shoes. I wore gray. Always gray. But now? I think it's time for one splash of yellow." We spent the next hour sketching the daisy, adjusting size and shape until it felt right. I told her it would fade a bit over time. "That's okay," she said. So did I. When I finished, and she looked down at her ankle, she touched it softly and whispered, This is the first selfish thing I've done in 30 years. Then she cried. Quietly. Not from sadness, but from something else. Relief. Maybe. Release. I walked out and sat in the hallway for a long time. And I knew this was going to be part of my life now, whether I planned for it or not. Friday became my day. I started coming in every week after my last client at the shop. No pay. No schedule. Just a backpack full of ink and a heart that felt less heavy. Every time I walked into Willow Haven, someone new was waiting. Sometimes with an idea. Sometimes just a feeling they hadn't put into words yet. One woman wanted a butterfly on her wrist. Because I finally feel light enough to fly, she said. A man named George wanted the word still on the back of his hand. Because I'm still here. And I want to see it every morning when I drink my coffee. Not everyone understood. Some of my friends thought I was nuts. Dude, tattoos in a hospice? Who even sees them? But I had seen it. I had seen the way their eyes lit up when they looked at the ink. I had seen 80-year-olds sit up straighter, laugh harder, walk lighter. One day, after a session, Walter called out to me as I passed by his room. Ryan, you know what you're really doing, right? I paused at the door. What's that? You're not just giving us tattoos. You're giving us our last damn choice. And that's a hell of a thing. I didn't know what to say. So I just nodded and kept coming back. There was this moment when I realized this wasn't just something I did on Fridays. It had become part of me. Not a hobby, not a side project, but something that cracked me open and let the light in. It started with Walter's wolf and Martha's daisy, but then it spread. Word got around. People at Willow Haven started asking for me, sometimes by name, sometimes just, is the ink guy coming? I started getting letters. Real letters, not texts, not DMs, but actual envelopes. Postmarked. Carefully written in looping cursive. One said, Dear Ryan, my name is Regina. I heard you draw on people's skin. I'd like a butterfly. On my shoulder. I used to be scared, but I'm not anymore. How could I say no? And when I showed up the next Friday, there were 3 people waiting in the hall. One with a sketch on a napkin. One holding a Polaroid. One holding nothing but an idea in their heart. That was the day it hit me. This was no longer just me showing up. This was a movement. Regina's tattoo was delicate. A butterfly with soft wings, floating just above her shoulder blade. Why a butterfly? I asked as I traced the design. She smiled. Because they said I was always crawling. Too quiet. Too careful. But now, I want to believe I can fly, even if it's just in here. She tapped her chest. After I finished, she looked in the mirror, placed her hand over the ink, and whispered, "Now they'll know." I didn't ask who they were. Sometimes, it's better to let the story live in the silence. Every week, the list of people grew. Julia started keeping a sign-up sheet, taped to the break room fridge with a magnet that said, "One day at a time." And what amazed me most, these weren't sad, fading people. They were alive, bold, funny, cracking jokes and throwing shade. They weren't giving up. They were finally letting go. Letting go of years of expectations. Letting go of should and later. One man wanted a flame on his chest. Another, just a single dot on his wrist. Why a dot? I asked. Because it's a pause. I spent my whole life rushing. For everyone else. Now, I want to remind myself, stop. That was Viola. She was a retired teacher. 3 kids. 12 grandkids. She looked at that tiny dot and smiled like she'd just planted a flag on the moon. That's when I started the album. A thick, leather-bound book where I kept a copy of every design. Every name. Every phrase. Sometimes they'd write something beside the sketch, a sentence, a date, a memory. I added pressed flowers. Napkin doodles. Even a button from someone's favorite sweater. It became sacred. Not a collection. A living archive. And when I felt lost, in my studio, in my head, I'd open it, run my fingers over the pages, and remember who I was drawing for. One Friday, a man named Robert came in. Plaid shirt. Hands like carved wood. He wanted a wave across the inside of his forearm. Why a wave? I asked. He handed me a photo. Faded. Him, holding a toddler on his shoulders, the ocean behind them. That was the last time I remember being happy. Nothing after that ever quite measured up. The wave was warm that day. Mike had laughed. I want to carry that feeling here. In my hand. We made it small, clean, soft. When he looked at it, he didn't say anything. Just nodded. And breathed deeper. One guy, George, the one who wanted still on his hand, came back a week later. I use this every day, he said, holding up his hand with the word visible under his coffee mug. It reminds me. I'm still here. And that's what these tattoos became. Not declarations. But reminders. Not about endings. About presence. People started calling my little workroom the studio. Someone taped up a sign, Freedom Fridays ink optional. It made me laugh. But it was true. They came for the tattoo. But stayed for the meaning. Not all the sessions were easy. Sometimes someone would miss their appointment. The room would be empty. The nurse would give me a small nod. I'd know. And I'd open the album. Find their page. Read their words again. They weren't gone. They just moved into the ink. I told one of my friends, Jake, a fellow artist, about all this. He shook his head. Man, isn't that a little dark? I mean, who's even going to see those tattoos? And I just said, they see it. That's enough. If I've learned anything, it's this. Sometimes, a tattoo doesn't mark the body. It marks the moment. In some moments, they deserve to be permanent. Somewhere around month 3, I realized the album wasn't just a binder of sketches anymore. It had changed. Grown heavier. Not just in weight, in meaning. It had become sacred. A living archive. A record of moments where someone said, "This is who I am. Let the world see it." It wasn't filled with big, flashy art. It was filled with breath. With softness. With final declarations not of endings, but of identities. The truest kind. Each Friday, I'd bring the album with me. Lay it on the small table next to my machine. People started asking to see it before their session, flipping through, whispering, smiling at names they recognized. Some even added things themselves, dried flowers, small photos, folded notes, sometimes even ticket stubs or ribbons. One guy, Bill, glued a bus token next to his sketch. First time I ran away from home. That token was my freedom. I kept it there. Everything stayed. Julia pulled me aside one afternoon. You know you've got a wait list now, right? A wait list. She nodded. Yep. Patients are signing up on the fridge in the break room. Some even argue about who gets next Friday. I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it felt alive. People who the world had written off as done were now negotiating for their moment. Their story. Their ink. That Friday, a man named Robert sat down again, not for a new tattoo, but just to flip through the album. This is going to sound strange, he said, but this book, it's louder than most people I know. He tapped a page with his finger. This one. Martha's Daisy. She was my neighbor. We used to argue about squirrels getting into the bird feeder. She showed me the tattoo and said, "Now I have my own kind of wild." He smiled. A quiet, full smile. The kind that holds stories. Then there was Thomas. A man who had lived hard. Said very little. Wore a wedding band that had clearly been resized a dozen times. He wanted a simple circle on his chest. "What does it mean to you?" I asked. He looked down, took a deep breath, then said that I made it back to the beginning. Full circle. I wasn't always a good man, but I got better. And now? I want my grandkids to remember that I kept going, right to the close. We inked it small, right over his heart. Below it, the date, not of his birth or anything poetic. Just that day. The day he forgave himself. The album kept growing. Every page was a window. Sometimes I'd flip through at home, late at night, when the studio was too quiet. It was like having coffee with ghosts, but not in a sad way. They were there, talking, reminding me why I do this. One day I came in and saw something taped to my usual door. A sheet of paper. In big, looping letters, "The Gallery of Last Freedoms. Open Fridays. Walk-ins welcome." I laughed. I teared up a little, too. It wasn't my idea, but someone out there got it. This wasn't about art. It was about agency. I remember one day I was in the room alone. It was raining. Jazz played from the hallway speaker. A nurse walked in with a new sketch. "This is from Clara. She can't draw very well, but she hopes you'll get the idea." It was a mountain. Crude lines. A triangle, basically. Below it, written in all caps, "I still climb." She was 87. Had arthritis in every joint. And she wanted that mountain on the back of her hand. So I can see it. So I don't forget I'm still reaching. I tattooed it on gently, with care, like I was brushing dust from stone. When I finished, she kissed my cheek. "You're part of our stories now," she said. I took a long look at the album that night. The corners were curling. The leather was cracked. It was no longer neat. And I loved it for that. Every imperfection was someone's declaration. It smelled like lavender, coffee, and ink. And when I held it, I didn't just remember the people. I remembered their voice. The way they said, "Can you draw this? This one's for my daughter." This is who I was, even if I didn't say it out loud. I didn't know it yet, but that book would one day outlive us all. Because some things aren't made to be forgotten. They're meant to be passed on. Page by page. Ink by ink. I always thought my job was to give. I'd show up, listen, draw, leave. They walked away with a tattoo. I walked away with a story. A quiet exchange. One-sided, but meaningful. At least, that's what I believed, until the day Henry flipped the whole thing around. He was a new arrival. Veteran. The kind of man whose voice sounded like it had gravel in it. Wiry, sarcastic, eyes like worn-out steel. He stopped by my little room the first week he got to Willow Haven. Just leaned against the doorframe and looked me over. "You're the tattoo guy?" "That's me." He studied me for a moment, like I was a puzzle he'd already solved. "I don't like tattoos," he said. "Fair enough. But I heard you don't just draw. You remind people who they are." And with that, he turned and left. Didn't say another word. 3 weeks later, he came back with a folded piece of paper. "I'm ready." I opened it. 3 words, handwritten in shaky script. I lived well. Beneath it were scribbles, names. "Kids? Grandkids?" "Put it right here," he said, pointing to his chest, just above my heart. "So when they look down, they'll know." The session was silent. He didn't tell war stories or talk about regrets. He just closed his eyes and breathed. And when I finished, he didn't even glance at the mirror. He looked at me. "Now it's your turn." I blinked. "What?" "Your turn," he said again, slow and clear. "You've been carrying everyone else's stories. Time to carry your own." I tried to laugh it off. "I'm just the guy with the needle, Henry." He shook his head. "No, you're the guy who listens. You've given us all something. Now let us give you something back." I didn't know what to say. Nobody had ever asked to give me a tattoo. But the idea stuck in my ribs, like something unfinished. The next Friday, Henry came prepared. A new sketch. It was simple, a circle, slightly broken on one side. And below it, still unfinished. "That's you," he said. "Why a broken circle?" "Because you're still writing. You haven't reached your ending. And maybe, that's a good thing." I agreed. But I couldn't tattoo it myself. So I called my friend Luis, another artist I trusted like a brother. We set up in my studio on a quiet Monday morning. I sat where hundreds of people had sat before. The machine buzzed. And for the first time in 15 years, I was on the other side of the needle. Luis was gentle. Careful. The pain was light. But the meaning? Heavy. When he finished, I looked in the mirror. The ink sat just below my collarbone, close to my heart. A broken circle. And those two words, still unfinished. When I went back to Willow Haven that Friday, people noticed. Clara smiled and said, "Now you match." George held up his coffee mug and said, "Now you get it." Even Julia, who'd seen it all, just hugged me. "Welcome to the club," she whispered. And something changed. Not in the room. In me. I was no longer just the witness. I was part of the gallery. A few weeks later, a woman named Grace gave me a card. Homemade. Drawn with colored pencils. 6 tiny sketches on the front. A flower, a mountain, a teacup, a bird, a pair of hands, and a little black heart. Inside, it said, "To Ryan, thank you for hearing what we couldn't say out loud." I keep that card in the top drawer of my desk, right next to my passport. And on the hard days, I open it. Not for comfort. For truth. That same month, someone taped up a new sign over my studio door. It read, "Gallery of the Living. Tattoos optional. Listening required." I left it there. Because that's what this had become. Not a project. Not a favor. A conversation. The album kept growing. Some days I feared opening it, afraid of who might no longer be there. But I always did. Because with every page, I remembered, I wasn't just giving something. I was receiving it, too. They didn't just let me tattoo them. They let me see them. And in doing that, they let me see myself. Every tattoo artist has one piece they carry forever. Not on skin, but in silence. For me, it's not Walter's wolf. Not Martha's daisy. Not the flame, or the dot, or the mountain. It's the moment after the tattoo is done. When the machine quiets. When they look in the mirror and don't say anything. They just press their hand to the ink and breathe. That breath? That's the real art. There was this one evening, late, quiet, the sun bleeding into the horizon. Jazz played from a hallway speaker. The coffee was cold. The floor squeaked like always. I sat with the album open on my lap. The pages had begun to curl, edges soft with time. There were coffee stains. Fingerprints. One page had a small pressed daffodil taped to the corner. On that page, a tiny bird sketch. Above it, in neat handwriting, "When you're flying, it doesn't matter how long you stay in the sky. What matters is that you took off at all." I couldn't hold it in. Not sadness. Gratitude. Because if even one person left this world feeling seen, if just one of them looked at their tattoo and thought, "I did it. I chose something for me," then everything I'd done was worth it. Nobody asks me why I do this anymore. Because they see it. In the way people smile when they walk past my door. In how they sit straighter. Speak louder. In how they hold their hands, not like they're old, but like they're whole. No one pays me. And I never ask. What I receive is bigger than money. It's stories. Experience. The kind of wisdom you don't find in books. They share it not because I ask, but because I listen. That's all they've ever wanted, really. Someone to listen. One day, Melissa, a nurse who's been there longer than the floors, handed me a thick notebook. Soft leather cover. Heavy pages. "Your old album's falling apart," she said. "Time for a new one." Inside the front cover, she'd written, "To Ryan, the one who turns skin into memory. Thank you for giving people the courage to be." I didn't write in it for weeks. It felt too clean. Too important. But one night, I picked up a pen, took a deep breath, and wrote, "If I helped give someone even one more day, then I've done enough." We fear endings. Not because of the end itself, but because we're afraid no one will remember we were ever here. But tattoos? They say, I was here. I felt things. I mattered. There was a young nurse, new to the staff, who saw the tattoo on my chest one day. The unfinished circle. He pointed and asked, "What's that mean?" I smiled. "That none of us are finished." He paused, then nodded slowly. "That's a good one. Maybe I'll get one that says, 'Just starting.'" I laughed. "Yeah, that works." These days, when I leave Willow Haven and return to my studio, I take my time unlocking the door. I hang up my jacket, put on a record. Sometimes Miles Davis. Sometimes Springsteen. Pour a cup of coffee I'll forget to drink. Then I sit. The machine rests on its stand. The new album waits on the shelf. And the room fills with voices. Not out loud, but they're there. Walter. Grace. Henry. Clara. Robert. Sometimes I think I hear them ask, "You still holding on, Ryan?" And I smile. Yeah, I'm still here. And I'm still drawing. Last Friday, Grace gave me a folded piece of paper. She looked tired, but peaceful. "I know you're going to miss us. But don't be sad," she said. Why's that? She winked. Because we're still here. I opened the note after she left the room. Inside, it said, when I'm gone, don't cry. Just turn the page. We're still there. We always were. I added it to the very last page of the old album. Closed the cover. Exhaled. I think about that a lot now. How every story, no matter how short, deserves to be told. How every heartbeat is worth remembering. And how sometimes the most beautiful chapters are the ones written right before the end. Because ink fades. But memory? That stays. And it keeps breathing. Through the ones who dare to listen.